I come from pioneer heritage. We go back to the pushcart pioneers that came with the 4th and 5th pushcart pioneers going to Salt Lake Valley. That was my father's people. My mother's people came to northwestern Colorado when it was opened up to homesteading in about 1920. My father had worked for the big cattle ranches that had from 150 to 175,000 cattle in that area, and the area covers 150 miles each way. I came to Nebraska basically to go to school. I met my wife. I went home to Colorado. I worked for a while, and then I came back and got married, and I've been here ever since. Well, I knew I had to write because the young people that I put on programs for at schools and summer camps and church activities were almost demanding that I put my stories in writing, and the book God Loves Even Cowboys is a result of this. The sketches I made, I did that so you would have an idea what the true cowboy life was like. When I was born, that was about the time that the true open range ended, but our area was trying to hang on to the past. But to get back to the stories, here were these old men that had driven cattle from Mexico to Canada, that had driven over the Chisholm Trail, had driven into Dodge City, driven cattle to Montana, worked in Montana, worked through the West. They were old men when I was a little child. The little town where I grew up was the 3rd largest shipping point in the United States for many, many years. And my father had run away from home at 12 years old and had worked for the big cattle companies. And so the ranchers that were the ranchers in my day that I worked for were men that had worked for him in his age, with the ranchers he did, and they had become ranchers. Well, I got to work for them, and so this is where I learned the trade, but I heard the stories from these old men and my grandfather and other old pioneers, but it was the real true old-time cowboy that I heard the stories from. Thank you, Vicki. How are you tonight, Dave? See, you made it. We're happy you're all here. What is a book? A book is a friend that is familiar. It is enjoyable. It is useful. And sometimes a book opens to us a world that we would never know or never see. The book, God Loves Even Cowboys, was written for young people, like these two here, and one back there, and a little girl over there. But you know what I found out? I found out that there's a little boy or a little girl in all of us. Now, I'm just a little boy trapped in an old, beat-up, worn-out shell. And I'm sure, knowing some of you here, you're in the same shape I am, and you'd trade it off if you could for a young one, but I guess we can't do that. So with that said, I guess we'll get started on the program. Oh, I went around the corner and I walked around the block and I walked right into the baker's shop and I picked 3 donuts out of the grease and I handed the lady a 5-cent piece. Oh, she looked at the nickel and she looked at me and she said, "This nickel is no good to me. There's a hole in the middle and it's all the way through." "Well," says I, "lady, there's a hole in your donut too." We never sang Home on the Range. We never strummed a guitar. There was always a cowboy that had a fiddle. I'm kind of attached up here, so I can't use this for what I want, but the handkerchief, the neckerchief, was one of the greatest things ever. If the bugs were bad, we put it like this, it kept the bugs out. If the alkali dust was bad, we put it like this. There were many uses for it, but one of the most interesting uses for it, you will all think amusing, I hope, was when we had a dance at cow camp. Now, there was always somebody that had a fiddle, or they had a harmonica, and cowboys loved to dance. And being there was no cowgirls, the fiddler or the harmonica player would take matches and he'd break short ones and long ones and he'd hold them in his hand and we'd draw straws. And the short straw was the girl. And how did you know you were the girl? You tied it around your arm and of course you had to follow. Now, you might be a big fella with a little tiny leader, but that didn't matter, and we all had fun. Now, if you wanted to insult one, call him a cowboy. But if you wanted to compliment him, call him a buckaroo, which was the term used in Nevada. Wyoming, the title was called Waddy. But most of them just like to be called a plain hand. Just a hand, a cowhand. There was the old man, O-L-E man. O-L-E was the term of endearment. As you read the book, you will see the term O-L-E. Old Ross, the old pony. But when you see the term O-L-D, old, that denoted two things. Contempt or age, and both were held in contempt. The cowboy, the little song about the donuts, were the type of songs he sang. Now, as you notice, I sure wouldn't get on the Grand Ole Opry. I mean, it's for sure. And sometimes the old cows would sit down and howl like the dog did when they heard us singing. And we also had little sayings like this. Holy smokes, the preacher shouted as his wig went in the air. His head looked like heaven because there was no parting there. I'll use the example. If you were invited to dinner, now you rode by a ranch and it was dinner time. And they were all going to the cookhouse, and the cook says, come on in, which you knew you were welcome. You politely waited in line as the last because you were the guest and you waited till last. You ate, you cleaned up your plate, then you helped do the dishes to show your appreciation. And there were many other small things like that was a code of ethics. And what is so sad to me today, so many people think if they buy a hat with a big brim and some boots, that gives them the license to be vile and wild and indifferent and have no respect. The old-time cowboy never swore or used a bad word in front of a woman. They tipped their hat, and it was yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and women were safe. You never had these terrible things that we read about and hear about today, the atrocities that men commit upon women. You never heard a cowboy say a vile word or even a cuss word or even hell in front of a lady or a child. But now out in the hills or out in the corral, look out, it was a different story. I always think old Joe. We were loading some cows one day. Stockyards, and this old cow was going to turn around and come back down the chute, and he climbed over and he set his spurs to him and good and hard, and he was a setting the straddle over, and she kept trying to turn around, and pretty soon he blessed that old cow from heaven and hell and everywhere else. And when he got all done and she walked up into the train car and he jumped off, there stood the boss's wife on the platform with her best friend. Well, old Joe was so embarrassed. Well, he wasn't ever going to go back out that ranch. And he'd worked at that ranch for 25 years. He'd worked for Papa. But he was so embarrassed he couldn't face the Missy again. Well, finally she came to town, and she talked him into coming back to the ranch. And it took quite a while before Joe would come in the house because he was so embarrassed because that Missy had heard him say that bad language. Now, they had a code of ethics. You never gossiped. You never criticized. You only helped an individual. But in helping him, you never encroached upon his privacy. You never asked what his name. If he said, my name's John Peterson, he was John. Maybe on the next range, 50 miles away, he might have been Harold Peterson or Harold whatever. And you never questioned where he come from, where he'd been, or anything. These were the things. There were the good, the bad, and the indifferent. There were those that lived worse than their old ponies did. Those had a cruel streak about them. Those were vile. Those were the ones that the media today portray. Now, they were jokesters. Oh, could they tell jokes? And growing up in northwestern Colorado, did you ever hear Steamboat Springs, Rifle, Meeker, Craig? We had tourists. And some of the stories, these old-timers, by the time I was a little fella like Dave's little girl back here and some of these other little kids here, I used to go to town, and while I was in town, I'd go sit by these old-time cowboys, because a lot of them couldn't prove they had been born. They could not even get state assistance. And so ranches and kind-hearted people would give them a home. We always had our share of cowboys. A lot of them had been there before the Utes were removed. A lot of them had brought the first herds of cattle in. But they would sit on the steps or the benches in front of the stores, and these people would come along in their funny little cut-off pants and their funny little shoes and their little bill hat with the cellophane on it, and they'd all line up there in front of them, and they'd all start clicking their cameras. And old Pete would look at old Joe and just a slight wink out of the corner of his eye, and he'd say, "You ever see that old pony over there before?" "Nope, never seen him before." "Well, I had one out west just like it." Now, we're going to stop right here just a minute. Out west is out west. And if you're out west, it's still out west. Out west is the hottest, the coldest, the flattest, the highest, whatever. That is this mythical country. Different ones of my friends, they remind me of friends and people I knew as a child. And sometimes just visiting a person while I'm shoeing a horse will make me think of an old-timer, if I may use that term. And in doing so, it will unlock from the deep recesses of my mind stories. And I will, as I drive down the road in my pickup, sometimes I'm sure that the police might think I'm drunk, but I'm sitting here on my steering wheel making notes to myself because of what somebody did or said. And it comes from the genuineness of the heart that Nebraskans give to you. The only stories that are made up are the ones that I call Western Wendies. And as we say out west, they really aren't lies. The truth is just beat out of them. Well, one day me and the old man was out riding along, and we seen these old pair of bull buffaloes, and we rode on by, and we rode up on the hill, and there was this feller down there in the draw, and this old lady had him hooked to the plow, laying the whip twine. Oh, we felt so sorry for him, and we heads down there, you know. We find out his name is Martin Grassmick. And to give you a little background on poor old Martin Grassmick, this old lady had the bull whip and making him pull the plow, he was one of the most trifling, lazy, good-for-nothing people that ever walked. He had this great big passel of kids and this big old heavy Irish woman that was just meaner than the devil herself, you know. Well, anyway, he was just sitting over here in Omaha one day, and he got to talking to Jim Bridger, and Jim Bridger got to telling him about Paul Bunyan. And Paul Bunyan, you know, he logged off North and South Dakotas, this huge forest, and where, you know, the Minnesota stuff and all these lakes and stuff where this big old blue ox turned around. Well, west of these stumps, what is now Wyoming and Montana was this huge, huge swamp and lake. I mean, it couldn't run through these trees and these stumps. And so Jim Bridger told Martin Grasmick about the country up on Three Forks in Montana. So he traipses off to Denver and up the mountains, and by fall he gets to his camp up there, and he sets up camp, you know, and he's so lazy he didn't feed his animals, and they all went or killed. And so that's why me and Pops come along in the spring, and we seen him down there, and we just happen to remember them two old bull buffaloes over the hill, so we rides over there, and we dallies on them old boys, and we drags them back over there to where old Martin has his old lady hooked to the plow, and Martin, the old lady has Martin hooked to the plow. You know, you get the story, what I'm trying to say, even though my tongue gets ahead of my eyes and I can't see what I'm saying. Well, anyway, we gets the old team of mules unhooked off there and get the harness on them old bulls, and we get old Martin up on the seat, and we tell him to set his plow, and we're just ready to turn them old bulls loose, and we just dabs our rope off of them, and a passel of Indians come up on the hill. And them old bulls knew about them Indians because they hadn't got that old and that big by not. And they took off running, and they made a big old circle, and we spooks them out in that draw, see, out in that swamp, because we figured if we run them out in the draw, old Martin come in that swamp, Martin couldn't get off his plow anyway, they was going so hard, we'd run them out in there. Well, them birdie boogers, you know, they ran east for the longest ways, and they hit them stumps, and the stumps flew, and they went right on down, and came right on down past Omaha, you know, and they got down to New Orleans, and they played out. They plumb played out. Well, you know, them Creoles and Cajuns down there, they come and they took a look at them old bulls. They didn't know what they was. And old Martin, you know, like I say, he was the most enterprising man that you ever seen. And he knew gold was in them hills up there in Montana. And he looks at this river he plows. So he decides he'll start the riverboat business. But before he does, to get this whole business kicked off and get financing, he prepares this feast. Well, for many, many centuries, they had the Martin Grasmick days, and these kids come along today, and you change it to the Mardi Gras. I haven't ever told you about the horse I had to shoot and kill dead out west, have I? But the only thing, he was just like me. He wasn't ambitious, or he wasn't lazy. And me and him was out checking the cows one day, and of course we was keeping an eye on the ridge so the boss didn't catch us kind of poking along, you know how you do. Just kind of killing the day, and he gets all nervous, and he keeps looking back, and he gets all excited. I thought, boy, something's wrong, and finally I get up enough ambition, and I look back. Guarantee you what I seen just literally scared me to death. I never in my life seen such a blizzard coming. It was right down on the ground, and it was as high as you could see, and it was just a rolling, and just, why, the awfulest thing just scared me to death, and I sets my irons to that old pony, you know. Really wouldn't have needed to. He knew what that storm was. And we went to the barn just as he run, and all the way to the barn. I mean, I'm not kidding you. My back got colder by the minute. I tell you, it was just so bad I couldn't hardly stand it. We rode in the barn, the door slammed shut, and that blizzard overrun us. But you know, I had to kill that old pony right there in the barn. Saddest thing, I had to kill my good old horse. He was overheated on the front and froze solid on the rear. The wind, you know, out west blows real hard. I mean, really hard. The wind blows out west. We always hired a little boy to take care of our chickens. Because see, if the chicken was pecking with the wind blew so hard it blew our tail feathers out. So it didn't matter then which way she stood. But when it came time to lay an egg, if she was facing away from the wind and you didn't turn her around, she laid the same egg 6 times. It was dry out west too, you know. One time, my great-grandpapa, see, he was up in his 90s. He lived there. He was born there and lived there all his life, see. And he was like me. He'd never seen it rain. And one day we got one of those 12-inch rains, you know. The drop hit here, and the drop here at 12 inches apart, and that was it. And it was over with. Well, when the first one started, all of us young bucks, we run for the shed, you know, as hard as we go. And poor old Grandpa, he was coming along like this. And one of them big old drops, about so big, hit him upside the head and cold-cocked him. There he went down, just colder than light. We run out there and drug him in out of that rain, you know. We threw water in his face and did everything we knew how, you know. And I'll be switched, we finally somebody suggested, we took a bucket of sand in and put it in the oven and dried it out and threw it in his face, and he come conscious just like that. To write about the true cowboy life, you have had to experience, it has had to been part of your life. You must know it intimately. It's kind of like your best girlfriend. You get to know her, your best friend. You get to know them. It is a part of your life. You interact with it. And then you can sit down and you can describe what you have seen, what you have heard, and what you know. And you see, if you have never experienced, then how can you write about a man that his horse got crossways to a big steer and the steer jerked him down and dragged the horse across him, unless the very same thing has happened to you? The values of life, what it took, the fortitude that it took to live the dangers and the hardship. Now you see, you had to have nerve that most people didn't have, because when you stepped on a horse that had never been ridden before, you never knew what he was going to do. You roped an old big old steer. He may turn and attack you with these vicious horns, and if he knocked you and your horse down, I mean, at any moment, death was riding on your shoulder. Accidents, it was all part of it. And when you stepped a fork a horse, you knew that your life could end. You could be crippled forever. But why do I want to, what am I portraying in my book? The independence of thinking, that we can do whatever we decide we want to do. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm portraying the idea that we are a God within ourselves, but positive thinking is what it comes down to. The bottom line is positive thinking, and the old-time cowboy was the most positive person I ever seen. I think of the fellow that was hurt, and they brought him in out of the hills in terrible shape, and he was suffering. And as they rode up to the camp, somebody says, "Well, old Ross, you're in luck tonight. You must be living right, because the boss is here with his wagon, and you can ride in the back of the wagon rather than ride another 30-mile straddle of a horse in all the pain you're in." And so they had something very positive to look for in every bad turn of events. They looked for the positive. He had the biggest helping of nerve that anyone could hold. He was as honest as he could be. He was a fun lover. He pulled jokes and pranks on people. But nothing dangerous, because our work was too dangerous the way it was. When you wanted a job, you heard about a ranch that wanted a job, you rode your old pony in. One time I worked for Sow Belly Outfit, and I found out real quick what it was. We had boiled hog meat and boiled potatoes for 3 meals. And they were still in the aluminum kettle, and the old boar meat was getting pretty rank, and I pulled out and never got paid for my half a day's work. But anyway, I had to even furnish my own pony. But when you heard the rancher was looking for a job, you pulled in about mealtime, even if you had to sit under a cedar tree 3 or 4 hours, but you got there at mealtime and you rode in, you turned your old pony in the corral, and while you was turning him in the corral, you took a look at the horses that was there, and if they were a fine lot of good horses, you figured, well, now that's a pretty good indication you could work. Well, you went in, you sat down to the table, and you generally had a steak, and you had potatoes, and you had green beans, and you had corn, and you had tomatoes. And if the cook for evening supper, he would cook you rice and raisins. And if there was an old cow around you wanted to have a little fun with, you'd ride out and you'd dally on to her and stretch her out and you'd milk her out. And you'd get a little milk for your rice and raisins, which you would season to your own suiting. A little sugar, a little nutmeg, whatever. But generally we got it from Mrs. Carnation's cow's can. Then we always had some kind of fruit sauce, whether it was breakfast or not. And the cookie, he always fed us cold biscuits. Because he always said, you young sons eat too many of the warm biscuits. And I got to where I love a cold biscuit. Now that might not sound good to some people, and they always had this big 5-gallon tin, either on the roundup wagon or the cow camp or wherever, that had cold biscuits in. So when you got hungry, you could ride in. If you was in a camp and the cook wasn't there, or you didn't want to cook a meal, you could have a cold biscuit. So I hope you get the idea of the type of food we ate on a good outfit. Then when you got all done with the meal, you asked if they were hiring. You never ever asked what the wages were, because the boss would pay you what you had coming. You told the boss you would work for him. You would die taking care of his livestock. Many young men perished by keeping their word. Now, if a man never kept his word, he wasn't long for that range. Okay, we'll go down to the corral, and as we approach the corral, now you be quiet. You see, because we've already cut you 6 or 7 head of horses out, and the boss, whether it's the segundo or the foreman or even the boss himself, he will do the roping. And when you approach, when he will call your name, you will name the horse that you want to ride that day. And the horses' names were Dick and Sam and Sally and Pete and Betty and Sweetheart and whatever the cowboy fit the horse's name. And the interesting thing was, you never rode mares, you always rode geldings or stallions. There were whole ranches that could have 1,000 head of stallions that the men all rode. And if that's all you had in Remuda, you didn't have any problems. But you would call the horse's name. Now watch his hand very closely. See that large loop from his rayata? From his hand, he's standing there like this. Now watch that loop very careful, because when you call the name of your horse, that loop will jump out and land around your horse's neck. And that is called a hoolihan. Even the best rope horse, if you swing a rope over your head like this, will become frightened. That old cow pony, that old western cow pony would never let you up to him a foot. You always roped him. And a roped horse never turned their heels to you. You never got kicked. And if you had 150, 200 head of horses and somebody was in roping, they'd flip the rope, you'd crowd the horses in close, they'd flip the rope, and that was your horse. Okay, we got our horse and we're saddled up and we're started off. There's 4 or 5 or half a dozen of us, and you're riding along as our guest. And we reach the top of the ridge, and the rest of the boys, they drift down this canyon, and we drift up the ridge, you and I, and the rest of them drift this way, and we'll meet, about when the sun gets over there so we can get back to camp by supper time. And we had eaten at 4 o'clock in the morning. Cookie had got us up, and we shaved, and we cleaned up, and washed our face, and checked our clothes, and went out on the sagebrush and brought them in and folded them up where we'd washed them the night before when we had our nightly bath. And we did our personal little things, and the newest kid in camp, he would go wrangle in the horses, and when you heard the bells coming down off of the hill, you'd go out and shut the gate or tie the rope around when they brought them in. Then we'd eat breakfast, and we'd be in the saddle by 4 o'clock in the morning. And by the time sun was up, we would be out to where we could start getting a scope of the land and checking our cattle. Now keep your eyes open, because we've got to find the old cows in the bogs, and if there's an old cow slobbering, or if she's got a runny eye, we have to take care of it. That's what the boss is paying us for. Oh, I'm glad you've seen her. I believe she's stuck in the mud. Oh, yes. Now you stay back and watch me. I'm going to ride up, I'm going to drop my loop on her, and old Andy will help me. And if I can, I will pull her out. And then when I get her out, I will be hooked onto her head, and to get my rope off, I will have to get her walking away or trotting away from me, and I'll flip my rope off her and turn off an angle and flip her over, and Dandy will hold her tight until I get a hold of my rope and pull my loop off. But if she's stuck in the mud, I will have to get down in the mud with her, and I'll have to dig each leg out, and I'll have to take these little ropes I have tied on my saddle, and I'll have to tie the legs up so there is nothing there, and we'll get her out. Okay, Dandy, old boy, back, boy. Back, Dandy. Good, we got her out. Come here, old boy, let me get my rope off. There, easy, old girl. Easy now. Didn't you see how I got her up? I grabbed her by the tail, threw it over my shoulder, and swung again toward her the way her feet were pointing, and it brought her right up on her hind feet. Easy, old girl, get on those front pins. Get on those front pins. Easy. Come here, Dandy, quick. How did I get on? Well, I grabbed Dandy's rein with one hand, and I grabbed the saddle horn with the other, and he knew we'd better leave because that old cow's horns were vicious. Dandy knew that. Oh, what about those buzzards over there in the sky? What do you think that is? Shall we go take a scope at the land and see? This valley we're riding through someday is going to be a nice ranch for some rancher and his family. But today it's a good pasture. Oh, see those ponies leaving the valley? Those are wild horses. They've been down here to get a drink. Now watch them. See, they stopped up on the ridge and watched us. Oh, those other horses down by the trees. Oh, here, take my field glasses and look. Now look on the left jaw or the left shoulder, down on the foreleg. Yes, that's right. They belong to the LO7. Those are our ranch horses. See the old bay over by himself? That's old Auditor. He's in my string. Sad what happened to old Auditor. He was a super young horse. We had a bronc peeler by the name of Pete. Pete was good. Pete knew how to break horses. But Pete had one bad habit. About once a month at pay time, Pete would go to town and get drunk. And pity the horse Pete was on when he started home. Even if the pony knew the way home, Pete always thought he was going the wrong direction. That old colt really got punished. Well, when Pete rode Auditor to town the first time, that big, young, strapping bay was a fancy horse. And all the cowboys were begging the boss and even the owners to let us ride him. But Pete was to take good care of him because he was going to be the boss's pony. Well, Pete got roaringly drunk that night. And the boys finally got Pete straddle old Auditor, and they started home, and the night cold, light air kind of sobered him up a little bit. And all of a sudden, he began to using his lead-loaded quirt, the handle end of it, beating poor old Auditor's head, and cranking on him with his sharp spurs. And the boys would say, "Leave him alone, Pete. We're heading in the right direction." Auditor knew the way home. When I sees him the next morning, folks, he was a pitiful sight. His head was swollen so bad, and there were spur marks, and his ribs were showing. His ears were swollen, there was just little nubs sticking out, and his eyes were swollen shut. Because I was going to wrangle in the rest of the horses. And he was standing in a corral when I took my ladder to catch my old night horse. Well, when I come back, the boys had Pete. They had a rope around his neck, and they had it over the corral gate. The horses wouldn't go in, but nobody cared. The boss came out and rescued poor old Pete and explained the facts of life and sent him on foot out of the country. No one ever seen Pete again. But one ride home ruined poor old Auditor. He's in my string today, and he can travel. But he hates you like the devil taught him to buck. When you saddle him, you pull him up, you rope him, you pull his head over the back of another horse, and you get the saddle on, you put on your hackamore, you get on, and that's the way you mount him. Oh, why do we keep horses on ranches like that? Oh, see old Widowmaker over there? Old Satan? Old Rollers? These are the horses named by their bad thing. Every ranch has a few bad horses because they love to brag about their bronc peeler that can ride them. Oh, I've ridden Auditors. I've ridden rollers. I'm too old to do it now. But there was a time when I was young and weighed 130 pounds. It was fun then. But old Auditor, he never forgot. And one wrong mistake can ruin some of the finest horses. You say, how did I teach old Dandy to hold the rope tight? Oh, that was simple. You see, we start these young horses when they're 3 or 4 years old. We get them in the corral if they show signs of being a good cow pony. We get a long 60-foot rope and an old saddle we don't care about, and we fasten it to the pony and put the old saddle on him. And then we run in a big old stout bull and put a bronc collar on him and tie him onto this pony. And then we open the gate. And most generally this colt's walking around not paying any attention, and that old bull sees the gate open and he heads to see his girlfriends out on the far side of the range. And when the slack comes out of that 60-foot rope, that old colt flops hard. 3 or 4 times that old pony's going to do one or two things. He's either going to lead along like he's broke to lead, or he's going to back up and he's not going to let any slack in that rope, and pretty soon he's backed up and he's back to the ranch and he's holding that old bull. And it may sound cruel, but I have seen crueler ways used to break rope horses, jerk chains and pulleys and all kinds of things. You see, your life depends upon your horse. If he lets slack in the rope and you got an old cow with a horn and she's on the prod, or if they get up, the rope's gone, you're in trouble. Your life depends upon this old pony to hold it. And this old pony, you love him more than you do even yourself sometimes. Oh, what do you think those buzzards are? Here, take my field glasses and see. That's exactly what I think. It looks like there's a horse down there, and it has a saddle on. Let's ride on down as fast as we can go. Ki-yi, ki-yi, Dandy, let's go. Boy, Ross, you sure got yourself in a bind. Just a minute. I'll get a rope tied on this old pony's tail, but first I need to take his saddle loose. We'll get him off your leg in a minute. Now, the way we're going to roll him off is we're going to hook on his tail, and then we're going to pull him up and forward, and that'll roll him off. You see, if we drug him, that'd drag Ross under there with his leg and damage his leg worse. It's broke right below the knee, Ross. Well, why do you think I carry this pocket knife? It's for this reason. See how easy I cut that pant leg? You won't hold the leg for me? Well, Ross will. You'll hold your leg, won't you, Ross? Grab it tight, just above the knee. There, ain't that pretty? Just call me Doc. I'm going to go back to that bunch of ranch horses, and I'm going to catch whatever I can, and we'll put Ross on my pony. And we'll put his saddle on old Dandy, and I'll ride one of the others, and then you can help Ross back to the ranch if one of them colts are just a little ornery. Hi, Bill. I see you caught up with us. You seen the buzzards, too? Boy, old Ross got himself in a bind, didn't he? Oh, he's going to ride Dandy. What do you think I got old Auditor here for? Well, I'm going to ride him in. Well, we'll just pull my saddle off of him, off of Dandy, and we'll get Ross up on him. And then we'll put old Auditor's head over your horse and we'll saddle him up. There. Bill, you take the leg on the other side, and my friend and I here will lift Ross up. Don't let it twist. We've got it pretty straight. There, how's that, old buddy? Yeah, you bet I'd do it for you, too. Come on, Bill. Pull his head. Chew it on his ear. Chew his ear. That'll get his attention. Keep him tight, because his front feet are flying, but up against the other horse, he can't get me. There, I got my rig strapped on. Oh, I'll just unbuckle a hackamore. You just keep chewing on that ear. You look hungry. There, Bill. Turn him loose. We'll see you back at camp. Boy, you boys made good time today. You made real good time. I figured I'd catch up with you at that creek back there 4 or 5 miles. How you doing, old buddy? Leg hurting pretty bad? Well, I figured it was. Hey, there's camp. Boy, Ross, you're in luck. You must be living right today. The boss's outfit's there, and you can ride in the wagon. Hi, Slim. Supper ready? We got Ross and Bill heading back to the medicine man with the boss. Good. Oh, man, this is a good meal. They ought to make you head chef down at the ranch, Slim. Oh, I know. You're the best bronc breaker we got. What about Tim Colts down there? You got a little gray I'd sure like to have. I said, I got to take care of old Andy. Old Andy's getting old and I need to turn him loose. That little gray looks good. Well, we'll go down. You coming with me? Let's go down to Creole with Slim. Look, his coat's over. Yeah, Slim, them McDurlins, they are good horse catchers. But they must have had an awful good year running horses over there on Blue Mountain. They always sold broke horses, that's right. I want the little bay, and I want the gray, and I want that big sorrel horse. Oh, I'll take that little black over there. And that other little gray. That Roman nose one. Oh, the boss told you that Ross was going to get those? Well, if old Ross had a good young horse, his horse wouldn't have fell in the badger hole and broke a leg while he was trying to rope a coyote today. Oh, you see, we cowboys keep practice. We rope a coyote. We rope a cow's heels. We rope anything we can rope for the fun of it. Well, let's go down to the stream. It's about bath time. See, I told you those clothes, if we washed them first and hung them on a sagebrush, they'd be dry. Well, old Saul says it's about bedtime. Good night, Slim. It's your turn to blow out the lamp. My dear lovely wife, and my children. And I had a friend by the name of Lula Masters that cooked at summer camps, and I would come and put on programs at these camps, whether it was 13,000 children for 2 weeks, besides their counselors on Grand Teton National Park, or on Tuttle Creek in Kansas, or on the Platte River somewhere in Nebraska. These people made me realize that I had something to share. And the thing I had to share is what I had seen as a very small child. And I got to work in part of it for 20 years. And I worked for the last ranch in northwestern Colorado that had a remuda. And the spring after I left, he sold his remuda of better than 100 horses and kept 3 or 4 horses, because they had bulldozed roads into the range and the pastures, and they were hauling them in trucks. It was economics that squeezed out the ranches. Nebraska. Nebraska's product. Oh, we talk about corn and we talk about cattle. But Nebraska's product is their wonderful, wonderful people. We have ethnic groups. We have the Bohemians and the Dutchmen. And we have the Irish communities. But we have Nebraskans. They're all Nebraskans. They celebrate their heritages, but they're Nebraskans. And you drive down the highway and you have problems, Nebraskans stop and help you. Then you have the great sandhills of Nebraska, the greatest cattle country anywhere. Now, I grew up in great cattle country, but the sandhills of Nebraska, I worked up in southeast Cherry County. The Sandhill rancher is one of the finest people I've known. And the farm people, they're honest. And all of this carries on over into the city folks. And Nebraska is a very highly educated state. They take pride in their education systems. They have fine educational systems. Everyone supports it. Nebraska Nebraska is a great home. And I love to be here. And Nebraska, I came from northwestern Colorado, but Nebraska adopted me and made me one of theirs. Well, I guess what I would like people to get from my stories is the fact that I got to glimpse the door to the cow industry as it slammed shut. And I streaked out the door just ahead of the slam. And I was fortunate to that. And I would want this generation and others to understand what the true cowboy was, not as the media portrays him today. The honest, good, hard-working, loyal man that he was. There were good, there were bad, and there were indifferent. But I always knew the good. My father pulled out, as I tell a little bit of it in the beginning of the story here, caught in a blizzard. He left at night, he run away from home, and the night was warm, it was April night. The moon was shining, and he was too busy figuring out where he was going to go and what he was going to do, and all of a sudden he was caught in a roaring blizzard, and old Dick refused to move. Turned tail to the blizzard and stood there, and Dad knew that if he didn't do something pretty soon, he would freeze to death. So he put his lariat around old Dick's front feet, hobbled him, pulled his saddle off, and then jerked old Dick's front feet out from under him, threw a half hitch around the hind feet, and he had him hog-tied. Bound his feet up good together, cleaned the snow out from between the legs and the belly, and he crawled in, covered himself with his saddle blanket and his saddle. The blizzard raged, and he went to sleep, and pretty soon old Dick began to move and woke him up, and he dug out from underneath, and it was the middle of the day. Sun shining bright, and he looked down off of the ridge, and he was within a half a mile to a mile of the K-Ranch, the place he was heading. Well, he survived that, and he was put to running wild horses as a 12-year-old child. There's a kraal on Blue Mountain that my father built over 80 years ago. I hope I give you a taste of what the cowboy life was and what I grew up seeing. By the time I was 13, my mother got me my first job when I was 7, and by the time I was 13, I could do anything on the ranch any man could, and I was drawing top hand wages. And I worked for what was the big ranches of my time, but my father always laughed and says the ranches aren't any size at all now. And this was the background I come from. On this ranch where I've been working, everything is growing old. Long gray hairs are in the butter, silver threads among the gold. When the dog died, we had sausage. When the cat died, catnip tea. When Deborah died, we left here. Spare ribs were too much for me. Thank you much.